I call Todd Barclay.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's a privilege to speak on the first reading of the Electronic Monitoring of Offenders legislation bill. And I'd just like to acknowledge the other speakers across the House who have spoken so far tonight and thank them and acknowledge their support of the bill through its first reading so far. It's an important piece of legislation, Mr Speaker, as many people have already acknowledged, as it is putting victims at the forefront of the criminal justice system and trying to make sure that these people get a fair go. I just wanted to, I thought it was timely to acknowledge the Department of Corrections Chief Executive, Ray Smith, who was acknowledged in the Trans-Tasman 6th Annual Departmental Review for his personal performance and also for the performance of his department. Both him and his department have been ranked second, and so I think that's pretty timely really when we're looking at listening to what some of the opposition members have already acknowledged around making sure that we're integrating our services and making sure we've got the manpower to implement the technology that this bill puts in place, Mr Speaker. And it's a credit to Ray Smith and his team for the resilience and hard work that they've put into the improving the correctional system over the last couple of years under his leadership. And I'm very much looking forward to him presenting to the Law and Order Committee over the estimates so we can acknowledge him in person and thank him for the efforts of his team. As we've heard tonight by the Minister, Mr Speaker, this bill is aimed at removing the barriers of monitoring offenders, and it's around trying to improve the safety of those who are victims of crime and who are the most disadvantaged and vulnerable in our society. Mr Speaker, electronic monitoring can improve public safety by making authorities more aware of the offenders and how they've failed to comply with conditions of their whereabouts or conditions of their release out in the general community. And, Mr Speaker, without electronic monitoring, the conditions can be difficult to enforce. As we know, I come from a provincial electorate where we have a number of people that are out on probation, and simply trying to track somebody down from your branch to try and discuss an electorate issue can be difficult, let alone trying to track down someone who doesn't want to be found, Mr Speaker. So GPS and electronic monitoring will play an important role in future strengthening of our justice system. We've already heard that the areas that will be most targeted in this by this new technology, Mr Speaker, will be offenders of family violence, sexual offending and seriously high offenders. I was looking, while I was doing a bit of research for this, we've looked at the number of sentences in order by area, and I'm just going to talk about two particular areas that traverse parts of my electorate. And for Otago, we've currently got 1,012 individuals out on sentences in the community that are doing part of their rehabilitation back in the community, and 338 who are out on sentencing orders out in the community. And in Southland and part of Jackie Dean's electorate, Central Otago, we've got 691 who are currently serving part of their sentences in the community, and 229 who are serving, operating under orders in their community. And I think that's quite important. They're quite large numbers for quite small areas, and I think most general members of the public wouldn't quite appreciate how many of these people there are out in our society. And if you look at the percentage of those who are serving these orders back in community-based sentences, a fair majority of them, well over 50%, are between the age of 20 and 35, Mr Speaker, which indicates that if these offenders aren't already on their second or third offence, the chances statistically that they will reoffend when by the time they finish their sentence are quite high. So I think we've got to do everything in our ability to try and prevent them from reoffending, and that's part of what this bill enables, is that it prevents those who are may have been put into prison for gambling or alcohol or drug-related offences, helps prevent them from falling back into the same traps that saw them put in prison in the first place, Mr Speaker. So by being able to monitor and control their whereabouts through when they're in the community will play an important role in their rehabilitation. So not only in support of the victims that are most heavily affected by these individuals, but also for themselves, Mr Speaker. And if we look at the percentage of victims currently serving community sentences in order of most serious offence, there are 23.5% of them serving community-based sentences for violent-related offences, 3.1% for sexual-related offences, and there's about 10% for drug and antisocial offences. They're quite significant numbers when you look at the general makeup, Mr. Speaker. So these are pretty dangerous individuals that are in and around our communities right now as we speak. And if you look at the general prison population as well, of about 8,500 prisoners, all of these people, if not, well, most of them, certainly not all of them, will be back in communities eventually, whether it's in 6 to 12 months' time or whether it's in 20 years' time. They will be somebody's neighbour, somebody living across the road from somebody, living across the road from a family, and they'll be integrated back to society eventually. So we've got an obligation as a government to do everything that we can to ensure that the smooth integration of them back into society is as seamless as possible to prevent them from reoffending and getting back into the criminal justice system, Mr. Speaker, because as we've heard from a number of other members, up until now, these people have been in the communities and we've been able to track them through some form of radio tracking, but it is quite difficult to actually tell exactly what they are doing and where they are and whether they're in places that they should or shouldn't be. And response times from police can sometimes put victims in danger as well. So it's part of, I think, and we've heard from the Minister, it's part of a synchronised response that the reason why it's taken a little bit longer to roll this legislation out across the most serious of offenders is because they've wanted to make sure that from a correctional perspective and also a police perspective that they've got the capability and capacity to actually administer the rollout of these services, Mr. Speaker. The second point I wanted to touch on was the fact that offenders serving short prison sentences and who are reconvicted at a higher rate of offenders serving than any other prisoner. And I think that goes back to the point where majority of these people that are serving community-based sentences are of the age of between about 20 and 35. Most of these people, all of them who are willing and able, are of working age and of working ability. So whether they're in the community or whether they're traversing back through the correctional facility, if they don't have a qualification or a set of skills that they can apply to the workforce already, then it's in everybody's best interest that they do so, Mr. Speaker. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the Otago Correctional Facility, which is in just out of Milton in my electorate. And I want to acknowledge the manager there, Jack Harrison, who manages just over 200 staff and looks after or ensures the security and the locking up of about 415 prisoners, Mr. Speaker. And Jack was kind enough to give me a tour around his facility a couple of months ago and took me through the various units that they've got there, right from high security to medium security to drug and alcohol rehabilitation to low security and then into their community integration wing. And the important part about this is that almost all of these prisoners, whether they start off in drug and alcohol rehabilitation or in high security, work their way through that system back to integration. So almost all of these people who have committed serious offences, while they're in credible danger to the community now, Mr. Speaker, they will eventually be back into society. And the point that he made, which has stuck with me, which has actually been the most valuable electorate visit as a new MP, is that all of these people, it doesn't matter what they've done or what their background is, while they're in prison, they're still human beings. They have got rights, albeit not as many rights as those who are on the other side of the bars. But when they do go back to society, it's in our best interest to make sure that they are equipped with the skills and capabilities to function in everyday life. And so just some of the examples of Otago Correctional Facilities work that they're doing to work towards this, Mr. Speaker, is that they've got 16 current prisoners working on a carpentry training workshop, which will enable them to get hands-on training in the theory and practice of construction. And part of that course is that they have to partially build a house. And by the time they've completed that course while they're working in prison, they will have a national certificate in building, construction and allied trade skills at level 2 and a certificate in carpentry at level 3 if they progress to the next level. This is a practical skill that most of these people haven't even completed NCA level 1 or 2 at high school, let alone with the thought of that they'll actually gain a trade. So while they're in a facility like this, it is in their best interest to try and gain their skills back so that they can be participating members of society, Mr. Speaker. So just on that note, that's why I'd like to speak in support of this bill, and I'd like to acknowledge again the opposition parties who have already committed to supporting it through its first reading, because it's an important part of corrections, Mr Speaker. Thank you.
I call David Clendon.
Thank